So those of you that know me from Vainglory know that I like to do patch notes. I used to do patch note breakdowns, and I'm going to do the same here for Wild Rift. The 1.1 patch is out. I'm going to go through the patch notes. I'm going to link a couple of things in the description. There'll be some videos from Yikes about the new skins. There's going to be some stuff about ability haste. I'm going to also link the video, which is the dev diary, down below. Thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel, and if you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. So I wanted to go through them. I wanted to kind of talk through some of the changes so that you guys can understand some of the bigger changes coming to Wild Rift, and then hopefully you'll be able to adjust your play. I would recommend that you go and watch the dev diary video. I will put a link to it in the description below, so you can go and either read it and watch it on this particular link here, or you can go and watch it on Twitter, which is where I saw it. It's a really, really good video, worth watching. It kind of talks a little bit about what's happening and what they're doing, and, you know, moving towards the beta in Europe release, which I believe is in 2 days' time. So very excited for that. So we've got some new champions in Wild Rift. We've got Darius, who I think is going to be absolutely like insane in the top lane. I don't think there are many top laners right now that deal with Darius very well. I think Darius basically craps on the majority of the top laners that are in the meta. So I'm expecting Darius to be incredibly good. I think, you know, we might see a bit of a Garen Darius matchup. That one can be a little back and forth, but I definitely think that Darius is worth getting your hands on if you're a Baron lane player, because he is probably going to be one of the stronger solo queue champions in the meta. Draven, his brother, is coming into the AD carry role. This is going to be an interesting one. He's very high skill cap. Draven is very, very high skill cap. I think if you're a good AD carry player, you're going to notice that you probably are able to win frequently and easily with Draven, because he's very aggressive. So you pair him up with a Braum or an Alistair or a Blitzcrank, and you're going to have a good time in lane, especially at the lower elos where, you know, Draven, if you play him well, you're going to absolutely like take over games. And I think with some of the nerfs to the other AD carries, like Ezreal is getting massively nerfed through mana this patch, I definitely think that Draven's going to be a solid option for you. Wukong coming later on. Wukong can, you know, very likely go in the jungle, but we might see him top lane and mid lane too. I would say that we're going to see a lot of Wukong. He's got really good teamfight abilities. His ultimate is going to be very useful, I think, in the current meta again, because we have a lower champion pool than League of Legends. He's going to be very useful in that regard, especially with the fact that Yasuo is still a popular solo laner. I'm expecting Wukong to be seen a lot. So Darius, if you're a Baron lane player, I would recommend getting your hands on him. He's easy to play, and I think he takes over games pretty quickly. Draven, if you're an AD carry player, worth practicing, because he will just dominate the laning phase. And Wukong, when he gets released, is going to be very high utility. He's going to be a bit of a pub stomper as well. His ultimate has got very, very high impact in team fights, which is obviously what you need sometimes when playing at the lower elos. So those are my opinions on those particular champions before they get released. We got some changes to features. We've got the ability to ping cooldowns, so we can ping ability cooldowns, which is always really useful, especially for your ultimate ability. Added the option for fixed joystick controls, which I know a lot of people have been asking for. Loads of skins coming on this patch. I know that Yikes has done a video detailing the skins and champions. I will not do that. I'm more of like a kind of like a, I guess, an educational learning type thing. So I will link Yikes' video if you want to go and check out the skins. He does really good rundowns of all the new skins, so I'll put that video in the description below. Okay, so we're getting some changes to abilities here. We're making a slight tweak to the second ability, Headbutt, for Alistair to promote more variety in Alistair's beefy plays. Basically, they're making it a higher cooldown earlier on and a lower cooldown later on. I don't think it's going to make too much difference. I still think Alistair's going to be a great support. Gragas is having his ultimate buffed. Essentially, they are increasing the speed at which it's thrown by 33%, which I think is a pretty big deal, because Gragas was very, very slow in terms of his ult. I almost found that it was very difficult to hit his ultimate properly, so I think this is going to allow Gragas to combo much more effectively. He was already pretty strong. I think he's going to still be remaining pretty strong. Janna is getting a massive buff. She's getting a base attack damage buff by 6, which is a pretty significant amount in League of Legends. She's getting a damage buff and a scaling buff to her second ability, which is the Zephyr, which is where you throw out the little storm cloud thing. And her shield that she gives to her allies is getting a base buff, and the cooldown is getting reduced. So I actually think Janna's going to be really strong. She's one of those champions that if you're able to dodge like Blitzcrank hooks, she actually bullies Blitzcranks and Alistair's pretty well, and she's a pretty safe support to play. So these are some good buffs for Janna. I expect to see her in the meta a bit more. Shyvana is getting nerf to her Flame Breath. So basically, when she's in dragon form, when she uses her third ability, which is where she shoots a fireball, the initial damage that it does and the damage that is left on the floor, those are getting nerfed by base damage and also their level multiplier on the scorch damage, and then the AD ratio is getting buffed on the initial, getting nerfed on the initial ratio. She's basically getting an AD ratio nerf, a level multiplier nerf, and some base damages nerfs to her Flame Breath. So Shyvana getting hit pretty hard here, and that was one of the main things that made Shyvana really powerful in the jungle. So I'm expecting her to drop down the tier list a little bit. Tryndamere, his first ability is getting a HP percentage buff, which is cool. I think that's going to give him a bit more power, and his Undying Range is getting a slight cooldown buff in the late game. Not a huge amount of changes here. I think Tryndamere is always going to be one of those champions that if you play Tryndamere well, he can take over games. But the problem with Tryndamere is he pretty much is just a split pusher. So he has limited utility in games. And there are a lot of other top laners that add the same kind of split push pressure while still retaining utility. Camille being one, for instance. So I think Tryndamere, again, probably not going to make him the most meta champion in the world. He's always going to be a very specific and niche champion. But these will be much needed changes for Tryndamere mains. And also Twisted Fate. His pick a card rotate time is getting quicker, so it's allowing you to cycle between your cards a little bit more quickly. Twisted Fate was already pretty good. AD Twisted Fate I'd seen a lot of. This is just going to make him a little better. And I actually think the rotate time on cards is significant. And so I think we'll start to see Twisted Fate a bit more in the meta as well. Okay, this is the big part of the patch. There have been some significant mana changes coming, and it's why when I played Ezreal yesterday, he felt really weak, and that's partly because of kind of what we're seeing here. They've basically felt that mana cost has been too generous, or rather, the mana regen has been too generous. So essentially, everyone is getting a base mana nerf, or pretty much everyone is getting a base mana nerf. So starting off, I'm going to go through the ones that I think are the most significant, because everyone's getting a base mana nerf, so obviously this is going to be important. For Ahri, that's important because she spams her abilities in lane. Sorry, I just hiccuped in the middle of the talking. Ashe she's getting a base mana nerf, but by the time that she hits level 15, her mana regen will be exactly the same. So Ashe only in the early game, so you can't spam volley as often, which is one of the things that I think made Ashe pretty strong. Amumu's getting a mana increase on his Despair, so that's his second ability. He's getting a mana per second increase, and also the ultimate cost, his mana ultimate cost is getting reduced across the board. So he's getting some of the ultimate offset, and it's going to allow you to channel Despair for longer, but obviously Despair's cost is also going up. Aurelion Sol, it's a pretty significant mana nerf. Camille, Blitzcrank, it's a pretty significant mana nerf because actually his abilities are quite high mana cost. This is the biggest one, Ezreal, mana regen 21 to 9. Ezreal in the early game, you were able to spam your abilities for absolutely no diminishing return. Like you were just able to spam them, and there was you almost never got punished for it. This is definitely going to impact Ezreal's early laning phase. It's also going to make him more reliant on tier than he already was. For instance, I'm going to compare that to Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa was also an AD carry that you sometimes saw tier builds on, and she's gone from 18 to 15. So whilst it is a decent nerf, it's not so much so that, I don't think, she might not need to go tier, even though it's a pretty significant base nerf to her mana regen. But the Ezreal one is the biggest mana regen nerf, like absolutely gutting his early mana regen, and I think that's pretty significant. No one else is getting like major mana nerfs. Basically, what you just need to know for the majority of champions is that you are going to notice that your abilities cost more in the early game when they take more of your mana pool. So you're going to have to be a little bit more, thoughtful about when you use your abilities. Twisted Fate is getting a mana buff to his ultimate, so he's getting 50 mana buff across his ultimate. Vayne is getting a mana nerf to her ultimate. It's going to cost her more, so she's going to have to sort of think about when she uses that more effectively. And Vi is also getting a mana buff across the board for her ultimate. I have no idea what they did to Xin Zhao's mana regen, but I'm assuming it's probably similar to a 3 nerf. Like everybody is basically getting nerfed by 3, apart from some select cases like Ezreal. Item changes. These here are all talking about Grievous Wounds application. So Grievous Wounds is the debuff that reduces healing, and it's basically getting changed to 3 seconds across the board. So you're going to get Bramble Vest and Thornmail are getting buffed. Mortal Reminder is getting nerfed in terms of application. They're thinking it could make tanks a little bit more effective. Tanks were already not... I wouldn't say that tanks were great in Wild Rift right now. There was a lot of damage in Wild Rift, and tanks didn't really have the time to scale up in terms of tankiness. So this might make them a little bit more powerful, especially with the changes to Mercury Treads and Ninja Tabai, with Tenacity getting buffed, and the attack damage, the auto attack damage reduction, getting a 5% buff as well, which is really important because marksmen are really powerful. So if you're playing a armor tank, or you're playing a tank that's going into a lot of AD damage, Ninja Tabai are absolutely... They already were a must, but Ninja Tabai are absolutely going to get an increase in value. The Gargoyle enchant as well, which did feel pretty useless, I'm going to be honest with you, is getting a big buff to the health that it grants you when you channel the Gargoyle enchant. So at 130% is pretty significant buff. So I think we might see a bit more Gargoyle, especially with high mobility tanks that don't need the mobility enchants to sort of get into the fight. We're also getting a passive cooldown reduction to Fimbulwinter, which is the new tier item that some tanks were able to utilize really well. The other big change is that we are getting ability haste, so we'll talk about that now because that is also a pretty significant change to the way that some items work. Okay, so I needed to briefly pause the video just here to bring up this little graph, which you can see on the left-hand side. I know you won't be able to read too much into it, but I basically just want to show you it because it kind of compares the two forms of cooldown reduction. The old form, cooldown reduction, essentially got better the more that you bought of it. So they were forced to cap it at 40% because beyond 40%, it just went straight up and you were able to cast abilities way more frequently than you really should have been able to. So that was capped at 40%. Ability haste is a linear scale, so that a single point of ability haste is always going to impact the cooldown of your ability by the same as the next point. So 1 point is the same all the way through the scale of ability haste. And for context, 66 ability haste is the same as 40% cooldown reduction. So if you hit 40% cooldown reduction in sort of Wild Rift before, you're now going to need 60% ability haste so that you're able to sort of get the same thing. And just to do a little bit of calculation on how you're actually going to end up hitting that, let's say you were running a basic mage build. You ran, I don't know, Luden's Echo with 10% CDR. You ran Awakened Soul Stealer with 20% CDR. You ran Seraph's Embrace maybe with 20% CDR, and so that gave you a total of 40% CDR. To get to 66 ability haste, which is the similar to 40 or the same as 40% CDR, you would get 10 ability haste from Luden's Echo. You would get 25, which would give you 35 from Seraph's Embrace. Awakened Soul Stealer would give you 25% ability haste. So I'm assuming that increases the ability haste that you already have by 25%. So let's say you've got 35, 25% of that is just under 10. So let's say it's 8 there or thereabouts. That would give you 43 ability haste. So you're already way behind the cooldown reduction from those items that would have previously given you 40% CDR. So you just have to be, you have to really commit to a cooldown reduction build. I think overall this is a little bit of a nerf to casters in general. If you compare it to the physical, and this is where it is going to become important because things like Zed and Lee Sin really benefited from these. Let's say you went, I don't know, Zed went Duskblade of Drakthar, Yomu's Ghostblade, and then maybe went Black Cleaver, and you didn't always go Black Cleaver. Let's maybe say you went Black Cleaver for 40% CDR. You would now get 45 ability haste, which is, again, if you go back to the chart, which you can see there. In fact, I'm going to have a look in just a moment. Wait a second, I'm going to pause the video and work this out. So 45 CDR, as I've just seen from this little table here, 45 CDR would give your 45 ability haste would be equivalent to about 30% CDR. So you would have about 10% lower cooldown reduction you would have had from your previous build. So it's a little bit of a nerf to casters overall. However, if you're going to go all in on a caster build that is focusing on using its abilities more frequently, you can break that ability, that you can break that 40% CDR cap, but you do need to itemize in a certain way. So it's going to change item builds a little bit. Okay, so we've got some changes to ability haste and CDR, which we've just talked about there. We can get rid of the little graph now. Goodbye, graph. Dragons. We want dragons to be more impactful, and we eventually want Wild Rift to adopt the Dragon Soul system in future, and these changes are the first steps towards that. Let's have a look. The base burn damage, 50 true damage per second over 3 seconds to 45 true damage per second over 3 seconds. So they've basically, dropped the burn damage of dragons. The burn damage per dragon now scales from 45, 60, 75, 90 to per 134 dragons your team has taken, including Elder Dragon itself, to a little bit higher than that. So the more dragons that you take, the more powerful the burn damage is going to be when you take the Elder Dragon. Elder Dragon Elemental fact now increases by 50% per dragon taken. So basically, dragons are going to be super important. Dragons are going to be really important. They're going to become a significant win condition in the game. So definitely as a jungler, you should be looking to prioritize dragons. Smite's initial charge delay, delayed by 10 seconds, just going to stop junglers from being able to clear the jungle quite so quickly and hit level 5 before laners. And Fleet Footwork got a nerf for ranged champions. This is a little bit of a nerf to Jhin, who was able to sustain pretty easily through Fleet Footwork. There's been some skill matchmaking to sort of match lower ping and skill people together. Limits to gifting, lowered AFK penalty timings, I guess because of it being a mobile game, AFKs are pretty frequent. And emotes now glowing game, shiny. There you go, that's all of the patch notes. I hope you've enjoyed. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you soon.